If someone had told me 10 years ago that my life would be defined by the quiet hum of a refrigerator and the precise angle of sunlight hitting my drafting table at 3 in the afternoon, I would have believed them. I was a creature of habit, a cartographer of my own small, predictable world. My apartment was my fortress, each book on its shelf a soldier, each coffee cup in its cupboard guard. Solitude wasn't a punishment. It was a carefully curated state of peace. I worked from home as a graphic designer, translating the chaotic ideas of others into clean, orderly lines. It was a fitting profession. I contained chaos for a living while ensuring none of it ever touched me. My world had a population of one with a ghost. The ghost's name was Julian. He wasn't dead, of course. Far from it. Julian was aggressively, incandescently alive. He was my best friend. He was a contractor who wrestled stubborn houses into submission, his hands calloused and capable, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a sagging roofline. He moved through the world with an uncomplicated confidence that I could only ever observe from behind the safety of my own ribs. His laugh was loud, a startling clap of thunder in my quiet life. He was all solid matter and forward momentum, while I felt like smoke, forever drifting and ill-defined. And, for a decade, he was the ache I lived with, the central, unspoken truth of my existence. The distance between us was a chasm I had meticulously maintained. It was carved out of the simple, brutal fact that he was straight. He was married. For 7 years, he had belonged to Sarah, a woman with a kind smile and a genuine affection for me, his quiet, oddball friend. I went to their wedding. I smiled and toasted their future and felt the champagne turn to acid in my stomach. I brought them housewarming gifts. I listened to stories of their vacations, their plans for children, their ordinary, beautiful life. Each interaction was a masterpiece of self-control. I was the supportive friend, the reliable sounding board, the eternal third wheel. My love for him was a secret language I never spoke, a pressure building behind my teeth. To speak it would be to detonate everything. To lose him, to lose the carefully balanced friendship that was both my greatest joy and my deepest pain, was a risk I was unwilling to take. So I lived in the space between, in the long, silent pauses in our phone calls, in the careful distance I kept when we sat on the same couch. He was the sun, and I was a planet locked in a painful, predictable orbit, close enough to feel the heat, but never ever to touch. Then came the disruption. The asteroid that knocked my world off its axis. It started with a phone call at 2 in the morning. My phone never rang at that hour. The sound was a violation, a screech of tearing fabric in the silence of my apartment. I saw his name on the screen and my heart, that frantic, trapped bird in my chest, slammed against my ribs. My first thought was an accident. A hospital. It was worse in a way. His voice was a ruin. "She's gone, Leo. She just packed a bag and left," Sarah was gone. The word divorce was a cold, ugly stone dropped into the placid pool of our lives. The ripples spread, and they were heading straight for me. My routine shattered. My quiet nights were now filled with his broken voice on the phone, his confusion, his grief. I became an archaeologist of his pain, carefully sifting through the wreckage of his marriage, looking for answers he couldn't find. I offered hollow reassurances. I listened. I did what a best friend was supposed to do, while the secret, selfish part of me felt a terrible, shameful flicker of something that might have been hope. A few weeks into the wreckage, the inevitable happened. He called, his voice flat with exhaustion. "I can't stay here anymore," he said, the here being the house he and Sarah had built together, a house that was now a museum of their failed love. Every corner, it's all her. I can't breathe. There was a pause. I held my breath with him. "Listen, I know it's a huge ask, but could I? Your spare room. Just for a month or two. Just until I can get my head straight and find a place the world tilted." My fortress was about to be breached. The ghost was coming to live with me. My meticulously ordered life was over. "Of course," I said, my voice sounding impossibly calm. "The room's yours for as long as you need it." He arrived on a Saturday, the sky a bruised, weeping gray. He had 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box full of things he couldn't bear to leave behind. He stood in my doorway, looking too big for the frame, too big for my life. He was a mountain of a man, suddenly looking like a lost boy. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, scraped-clean vulnerability that was terrifying to behold. "Thanks, man," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. I really appreciate this. It's nothing." I lied. It was everything. The first few days were an exercise in awkward choreography. We moved around each other in the small apartment, like two strangers forced to share a lifeboat. I learned the sound of his footsteps, a heavy, solid tread that was so different from my own quiet shuffle. I learned that he snored, a low rumble that vibrated through the walls. I learned that he left his coffee cup on the edge of the sink instead of inside it, a tiny act of domestic chaos that set my teeth on edge. But I also started to see him, really see him. Not the idealized version I had worshipped from afar, but the man himself, stripped of his context. I saw the deep grooves of exhaustion carved around his eyes. I saw the way his hand would sometimes tremble when he lifted his coffee. I saw him standing in front of my bookshelves, his fingers ghosting over the spines, a look of profound loneliness on his face. One morning, I was in the kitchen, making my ritualistic pour-over coffee. He came in, still bleary from sleep, his hair a mess. He was wearing an old, faded t-shirt and plaid pajama pants. It was the most unguarded I had ever seen him. He grunted a greeting and reached into the cupboard above my head for a mug, the same one I was about to grab. Our hands brushed. It wasn't a lingering touch. It was a flicker, a spark, the rough, callous skin of his knuckles against the back of my hand. A jolt went through me, pure electricity. Heat bloomed in my chest and shot down my arms. It was so intense, so unexpected, that I flinched back as if I'd touched a live wire. I pulled my hand away too fast, a jerky, panicked motion. The mug I was holding slipped from my grasp and clattered against the counter, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. He froze, his own hand still in the air. He looked at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You okay?" "Fine," I croaked, my voice of strangers. "Just clumsy." I grabbed the fallen mug and shoved it under the coffee dripper, my movements stiff and unnatural. My heart was a hummingbird, beating its wings into a blur against my ribs. He was still looking at me, a question in his eyes. I couldn't meet his gaze. I focused on the slow drip of coffee, on the steam rising, on anything but him. The air between us was suddenly thick, charged with something I couldn't name. He eventually took another mug and poured himself a coffee, but the silence was different now. It wasn't the comfortable silence of friends. It was a silence full of unasked questions and the ghost of a touch that had branded itself onto my skin. The power dynamic between us, the one I had so carefully understood for a decade, him the strong one, me the quiet support, began to shift a week later. It started with a cough, a deep, rattling sound that echoed from his room. By evening, he was shivering under a mound of blankets on my sofa, his face pale and slick with sweat. "It's just a cold," he insisted, his voice raspy. It was not just a cold. By morning, he had a raging fever. The big, capable contractor who could wrestle a house into shape was laid low by a virus. He was weak, disoriented, and miserable, and he was my responsibility. I found myself in a role I had never imagined. I was the caregiver. I took his temperature, the cool plastic of the thermometer against his hot skin, a strange, new intimacy. I made him soup, which he barely touched. I brought him water and medication, my hand brushing his as I passed him the glass. Each touch was a small, controlled detonation in my chest. But this was different. This wasn't accidental. This was necessary. It was care. He was too sick to put up his usual walls. The gruff confidence was gone, replaced by a childlike vulnerability. He would drift in and out of a feverish sleep, murmuring things I couldn't understand. Once, I was adjusting his pillow, and he opened his eyes. They were hazy, unfocused. He looked at me, really looked at me, for a long moment. "Leo," he rasped, his voice thick with sleep and sickness. "You're good." He closed his eyes again, drifting off, probably not even remembering he'd said it. But the words hung in the air. They settled into my bones. For the first time, I wasn't just his friend, his satellite. I was the one holding the center. I was the one he needed, the solid ground beneath his feet. The balance had shifted, and the world felt precarious and full of a terrifying new possibility. The fever broke on the third day. The storm outside seemed to break with it. For 2 days, a relentless, driving rain had hammered against the windows, isolating us, cocooning us in the quiet hum of my apartment. That night, the rain softened to a steady drumming, and the wind died down. Julian was finally sitting up on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, looking pale but lucid. The power flickered once, twice, then died. We were plunged into a sudden, profound darkness. The only sound were the rain and our own breathing. "Great," Julian sighed, his voice still a little rough. "Stay put," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. I knew my apartment by heart, even in the dark. I navigated to the kitchen, my hands finding the drawer with the emergency candles. A few minutes later, I had a small constellation of them lit on the coffee table. The light was soft, flickering, dancing on the walls. It transformed the room, shrinking it, making it feel like a cave, a sanctuary against the dark, wet world outside. We sat in the flickering light, not speaking for a long time. The usual distractions, the television, our phones, the pretense of being busy, were gone. There was just the two of us, the candlelight, and the sound of the rain. He was the one who broke the silence. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, reflective. "Sarah hated storms." I just nodded, not wanting to break the spell. She'd get all anxious, turn on all the lights, the TV loud. She needed to drown out the noise. He stared into the flame of the nearest candle. I never got it. I always kind of liked them. The world just stops. He looked over at me, his eyes dark pools in the wavering light. "This is nice. Just quiet." And then he started to talk. Really talk. He talked about the last few months of his marriage, the silences that had grown between them, the feeling of living with a stranger. He talked about his own failures, his inability to see how unhappy she was, his habit of burying himself in work to avoid the problems at home. He wasn't asking for advice or pity. He was just bearing witness to his own life, and he had chosen me as his audience. "I feel like such a failure, Leo," he admitted, his voice cracking on the last word. He finally looked away from the candle and directly at me, his gaze raw and unflinching. My one job was to make her happy, and I couldn't even do that. Now I'm 35, sleeping on my best friend's couch. "It's pathetic. It's not pathetic," I said, the word coming out stronger than I expected. "It's human. Your life fell apart, Julian. You're allowed to be a mess." He let out a short, harsh laugh. "You're the only one who says things like that. Everyone else just says you'll get through it, or there are other fish in the sea." He shook his head slowly. You're the only person who's really been here. Through all of it." "Why?" The question hung in the air between us. It was a simple question, but it felt like a trapdoor. "Why?" "Because I'm in love with you. Because watching you hurt is like having my own bones broken. Because being here in this quiet room with you is the most terrifying and most wonderful thing I have ever experienced." I couldn't say any of that, so I chose a sliver of the truth, the safest sliver I could find. "Because you're my best friend," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Because I've always been here, Julian." Even when you didn't see me, the words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. He didn't respond. He just kept looking at me, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, filled only by the drumming of the rain. The space between us, the safe 3 feet of couch cushion, suddenly felt charged, electric. It was like the moment before a lightning strike, the air humming with unseen energy. He moved first. It was a slow, deliberate motion. He leaned across the space between us. I didn't move. I couldn't. My entire body was frozen, my lungs locked, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel the heat coming off him, smell the faint scent of soap and sickness, and something that was just him. His hand came up, not to touch my face, but to hover in the air beside it, as if asking a question I couldn't answer with words. His eyes searched mine, and in their depths, I saw not just sadness, but a confusion that mirrored my own. A deep, profound uncertainty. And then he closed the remaining distance. His lips touched mine. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It wasn't hungry or demanding. It was hesitant. It was soft. It was a question mark pressed against my mouth. His lips were chapped and warm. It was a kiss of shared grief and flickering candlelight and the sound of rain. It was terrifying. It was honest. It was the most real thing that had ever happened to me. I felt a single tear escape my eye and trace a hot path down my temple. I didn't know if it was from joy or fear or 10 years of pent-up longing finally being released. He pulled back, just an inch, his forehead resting against mine. His eyes were still closed. "Leo," he breathed, his voice a ragged whisper. And that was all, just my name. But in the way he said it, I heard everything. The confusion, the fear, the discovery. The world had stopped, just like he said it did in a storm. And in the stillness, everything had changed. I woke up to the gray light of dawn filtering through my window. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I didn't remember. I was just me in my bed, in my quiet apartment. Then all came rushing back. The storm, the candles, the confession, the kiss. A slow, warm feeling spread through my chest. Hope. It was a foreign sensation, and it was quickly followed by its shadow, anxiety. I turned my head. The other side of the bed was empty. The sheets were cold. My stomach plummeted. The hope vanished, replaced by a familiar, icy dread. I sat up, my heart starting to pound a frantic, panicked rhythm. "Julian," I called out, my voice small in the morning quiet. No answer. I threw on a t-shirt and went into the living room. The candles from last night were just waxy puddles on the coffee table. The blankets on the sofa were rumpled, but he wasn't there. The entire apartment was silent. Too silent. The air felt thin, empty. His presence, which had filled every corner of my space for weeks, was just gone. Then I saw it. A single piece of paper torn from a notepad sitting on the kitchen counter. My feet felt like lead as I walked toward it. My hand was shaking. I already knew what it would say. I knew in my bones. The note was short, his handwriting a rushed, almost illegible scrawl. Needed to clear my head. Sorry. Sorry. The word was a punch to the gut. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. Sorry for what? Sorry for the kiss? Sorry for feeling something? Sorry for leading me on? The ambiguity was a special kind of cruelty. My carefully constructed world, which had just begun to expand to let him in, came crashing down. The walls went up again, higher and thicker than before. The spiral began instantly. He was disgusted. He was horrified. He was straight, and I, in his moment of vulnerability, had let him make a mistake. Or worse, I had somehow manipulated the situation. I had taken advantage of his grief. The self-recrimination was a vicious, relentless voice in my head. Stupid. You're so stupid, Leo. You knew the rules. You knew the boundaries. You had 10 years of friendship, and you threw it away for one stupid, impossible moment. I sank onto a kitchen chair, the note still clutched in my hand. The paper was already starting to feel damp from the sweat on my palm. My apartment, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a prison. Every object was a reminder of him. The mug he used, still by the sink. The indent his body had left on the sofa cushions. The scent of him that lingered in the air. His absence was a physical presence, a gaping hole that sucked all the air out of the room. The first day of silence was agonizing. I checked my phone every 5 minutes. Nothing. I tried to work, but the lines on my screen blurred into meaningless squiggles. I stared out the window at the rain-washed city, feeling a profound, bottomless loneliness. The solitude I had once cultivated as a shield now felt like a punishment. It was no longer peace. It was just the stark, echoing confirmation that I was alone. I called him that evening. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What would I even say? The second day was worse. The anxiety had curdled into a cold, hard knot of despair in my stomach. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was an active, malevolent force. It was the sound of his rejection. It was the sound of my heart breaking. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, searching for clues I might have missed. Was his hesitation disgust? Was his whisper of my name an apology? My mind became my own personal torture chamber. I imagined him at a friend's house, telling them the story. You won't believe what happened. Leo, I was sick, I was confused. It was a mistake. I could almost hear their sympathetic replies, the confirmation that he had done the right thing by running. By the evening of the second day, I had accepted it. I had lost him. The gamble had failed. I had traded a painful but stable friendship for a fleeting moment of impossible connection, and now I had nothing. The quiet hum of my refrigerator, once a comforting sound, now seemed to be mocking me, a monotonous drone in the crushing silence of my empty life. I had finally touched the sun. I had been burned to ashes. I was sitting on the sofa, staring at the blank television screen, when I heard the key in the lock. My heart stopped. For a wild second, I thought I was imagining it. But then the door creaked open, and he was there. Julian. He looked wrecked. He was wearing the same clothes he'd left in. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had a 2-day stubble that made him look older, harder. He closed the door softly behind him and just stood there, his hand still on the knob, as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to come any further. We stared at each other across the length of the living room. The silence was back, but this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with 2 days of fear and regret and unspoken words. He looked vulnerable. He looked scared. He didn't look disgusted. He took a hesitant step into the room, then another. He stopped a few feet away from the sofa. Leo, he said, his voice low and hoarse. I'm so sorry. There was that word again. Sorry. But this time, the context was his presence, not his absence. For what? I asked, my own voice thin, brittle. I was afraid to hope. For running, he said, and he finally met my eyes. His gaze was steady, full of a miserable honesty. That was a coward's move. I freaked out. I saw what was happening, what I was feeling, and it scared the hell out of me. He ran a hand through his already messy hair, a gesture of pure frustration. I drove for hours, ended up sleeping in my truck at some roadside rest stop. I just kept thinking about everything, about Sarah, about you. He took another step closer, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. My marriage wasn't just Sarah. It hadn't been right for a long time. I was, numb, going through the motions. I thought that's what life was supposed to be. You work, you come home, you go to sleep. You do your duty. He paused, swallowing hard. The confession was costing him. I could see it. And then I came here, he continued, his voice softer now. And I started to feel things again. Watching you in your kitchen, so careful with everything. Taking care of me when I was sick. Sitting in the dark, just talking. It was real. It felt more real than anything has in years. He finally looked directly at me, and the vulnerability in his eyes was a physical blow. That kiss, that wasn't a mistake, Leo. It was the most honest thing I've done in a decade. And that's what scared me. The honesty of it. What it meant. About me. About us, my own fear, the icy dread that had been my constant companion for 2 days, began to melt. A tiny, fragile flame of hope flickered back to life in my chest. I was scared too. I admitted, the words barely audible. I know, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. You've been scared for 10 years, haven't you? The truth of that, the fact that he saw it, that he understood, broke something open inside me. The tears I'd been holding back for 2 days finally came. They weren't loud, racking sobs, just a silent, steady stream down my face. He closed the last bit of distance between us and sat down on the sofa next to me. He didn't touch me, not at first. He just sat there, his presence a warm, solid anchor in my swirling sea of emotions. I don't know what this is, he said, his voice a low murmur. I don't know what we do now. All I know is that the thought of going back to how things were before, of you just being my friend that I can't talk to about this, it's worse than being scared. I can't do it. He finally reached out, not for a kiss, but for my hand. He took it, his large, calloused fingers wrapping around mine. His touch was warm, firm, and grounding. It wasn't a question this time. It was a statement. I'm not running again, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. But we have to do this together. You and me. No more secrets. I looked at our joined hands, this impossible, beautiful thing. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt brave. Okay, I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. Together, the next morning, I woke up slowly, peacefully. The first thing I was aware of was the warmth. A solid, living warmth pressed against my back. An arm was draped possessively over my waist, a heavy, comforting weight. The soft sound of breathing, slow and even, stirred the hair at the back of my neck. Julian. My eyes fluttered open. The morning light was soft, gentle. There was no panic, no cold dread, just a quiet, profound sense of rightness. I lay there for a long time, not moving, just soaking in the reality of it. Him, here in my bed, holding me. It felt less like a wild dream and more like a memory I was finally catching up to. A few days later, I came home from a rare trip to the grocery store to find him in the spare room. The two cardboard boxes he had never unpacked, the ones filled with the last remnants of his old life, were open on the floor. He was carefully taking things out, not to pack them away again, but to find places for them. He held up an old, framed photo of him and his brother as kids, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. He looked at it, then looked at the empty space on my bookshelf. "Do you think?" He started, then hesitated. "Would it be okay if I put this here?" My heart swelled. It was such a small question, but it was monumental. He wasn't asking for shelf space. He was asking for life space. He was merging his history with mine. He was unpacking his bags. He was staying. "I think it would look perfect right there," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He smiled, a genuine, relieved smile that reached his eyes. He carefully placed the photo among my art books and novels. It didn't look out of place. It looked like it belonged. He then picked up a stack of his own worn paperbacks and began to slide them into the gaps on my shelves. Our lives, our stories, slotting together. It was a quiet, domestic act, but it felt more significant than any grand declaration. It was a promise made without words. This is home now. We are home. Life found a new rhythm after that. A shared rhythm. It was a melody composed of small, ordinary moments that felt extraordinary to me. It was the sound of 2 coffee mugs being set on the counter in the morning instead of one. It was him taking up half the small kitchen as he tried to make pancakes on a Sunday, getting flour on his nose. It was the easy, comfortable silence of us reading on the sofa in the evening, my legs draped over his. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for so long began to recede. It was still there, a faint hum in the background, but it no longer had the power to command my attention. It was replaced by a quiet confidence that was entirely new to me. The fear of him leaving, of this being a temporary dream, was soothed by the mundane reality of his presence. His work boots by the door, his toothbrush next to mine, the way he'd reach for my hand instinctively when we walked down the street. I had spent a decade loving a ghost, an idea of a man I had constructed from a safe distance. But the man who now shared my life was real. He was flawed and sometimes grumpy in the mornings. He was messy. He was also kind and patient and looked at me with a tenderness that still, sometimes, took my breath away. He was better than the ghost. He was real. My old life, the one of quiet solitude and carefully managed peace, seemed like a lifetime ago. I had built that life like a fortress designed to protect me from the very thing I had always wanted most, to be truly seen. I thought order and routine were safety, but they were just a cage I had built for myself. Julian's chaos, his divorce, his grief, the storm of his arrival on my doorstep, hadn't been a disruption. It had been a liberation. He didn't break my life. He broke it open, letting the light and the air in. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the unexpected turn in a story I thought I had already written. He didn't just change my life. He revealed to me the person I had been too afraid to be. Someone capable of bravery, of connection, of a deep and abiding love that wasn't a secret ache, but a shared and spoken truth. He was not the end of my quiet, ordered world. He was the beginning of everything else. I had spent so long mapping the small, predictable coordinates of my own solitude. But love, I was learning, isn't a destination you can chart. It's a journey into uncharted territory. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of getting lost. Because I wasn't alone. I was with him. And that was the only direction I needed.